I never thought the child I raised alone would one day erase me from the most important day of her life. My own daughter sent an invitation to the very man who abandoned us years ago, her father, but left me, the mother who held everything together, off the list like I was already dead. But what she didn't know was that the very wedding hall she bragged about booking, right here in Santa Fe, belonged to me. Get ready, because this isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Comment below where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. My name is Eleanor Whitaker, though everyone in town calls me Nora. I'm 64 and I've spent most of my adult life behind a warm oven in Santa Fe, New Mexico, shaping dough before sunrise and closing the shop after the last red light fades along Canyon Road. If you've ever walked past my little bakery, you've probably seen the chalkboard out front with the crooked scones drawn on it, and you've probably smelled cinnamon and anise drifting out into the dry air. That's my world. Simple, steady, honest. It's a world I built with my own hands after my husband, Martin, walked out years ago and left me to hold together a life for our daughter, Lila. I say walked out plainly because there's no point dressing it up. He didn't die. He wasn't taken from us. He chose to leave, and the choosing never stopped. He chose new apartments, new stories, new ways to be a father that never required showing up on a Tuesday night when the school called about a field trip or the car wouldn't start and rent was due. I learned slowly that absence isn't silent at all. It speaks through the things you have to do alone. I learned to buy used mixers and patch the roof, to roll out pie dough when my wrists ached, and to keep the lights on by saying yes to every special order the art galleries threw my way. And I learned to tuck my daughter into bed by myself, telling her the world was safe even if it didn't always feel that way. So when I tell you that my daughter invited her father to her wedding and left me off the list, I need you to understand the weight of what that means. It wasn't just a missed name on an envelope. It was a judgment. It said that the man who quit us was acceptable for a front row seat, and the woman who kept a roof overhead should wait out on the sidewalk. The day I realized it, Santa Fe felt sharper around the edges. The adobe walls too bright, the sky too wide, the air too thin. People talk about heartbreak like it's thunder. Mine was more like a slow, clear snap inside my chest. I found out on a Tuesday, which is when I prep the dough for the week and do my books at the little metal table in the kitchen. The oven was still ticking from the morning bake, that private little sound it makes when the heat dies. I had flour on my palms and a rubber band between my teeth because I was bundling receipts when the mailman slid a stack of envelopes under the door. The top one was heavy, desert gold paper with Lila's careful handwriting. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened it right there, standing by the mixer. The card had a photo of them, Lila and Brandon, standing in front of a sandstone arch at golden hour like a magazine spread. He's got that practiced smile of a man who always gets the table he asks for. She looked beautiful. I'll give that to her even now. She looked beautiful. Inside, I saw the inner envelope and I saw the line printed in a glossy script. Mr. Martin Whitaker and guest. I read it twice, then 3 times, letting the words settle the way flour settles if you hold still long enough. There was no second envelope. No Eleanor, no Mom, no anything. Just the name of the man who left us, with a neat little "and guest," to soften the idea that he might show up with a stranger on his arm. I wish I could tell you I reacted with perfect grace, that I set the card aside and finished my day like a woman who's been through worse. But the truth is smaller. I sat down on the step at the back door and held the card like it might burn me if I squeezed too hard. My throat felt full, like a stone I couldn't swallow, and I had the strangest urge to laugh. Because that's the kind of thing life does sometimes. It circles back to the sorest place and presses. I thought of all the birthdays I baked cakes for when I couldn't afford cake. All the times I let Lila take the last clean towel and I dried my hair with a dish rag. All the ways I stretched $1 by telling jokes about it so she wouldn't be afraid. And here I was, not just uninvited, but replaced by the very absence that made me into the mother I became. Now you might be wondering about Lila. She is not a villain in a black cape. She's my only child, stubborn and bright, quick to run toward the fantasy of a life where nobody remembers the nights we were up counting tips on the kitchen floor. When she met Brandon, a polished man from out of town with money in his stride and slick plans for a tech company, I saw the shift. Fewer Sunday calls. More comments about personal brand and elevating the guest experience. It started small, choosing restaurants where I felt out of place, canceling on our breakfast date because a vendor demo ran long. Then came the way she referred to the bakery as Mom's hobby, which she said with a smile, like she didn't hear the disrespect tucked in the word. I told myself it was a stage that she'd circle back. I kept the kettle on and the porch light warm. After the invitation, I did something I'm not proud of. I called her without practicing what I'd say. "Honey," I started, trying to keep my voice soft. "I think there's been a mistake." She went very quiet. I could picture her in some pretty Santa Fe rental with exposed beams, glancing at the big new ring on her finger like it could give her courage. "There's no mistake," she said. "The guest list is tight. You'd think words would be gentler coming from your own child. They weren't. We decided it would be less complicated if Dad represented the family." Represented. A whole life's work swept into a neat word, like crumbs into a dustpan. I don't know how long I sat there after she hung up. Long enough that the afternoon shadows moved across the kitchen floor and the tile cooled under my feet. I let myself cry, but quietly, the kind of cry that doesn't make a scene. Then I washed my face at the utility sink, retied my apron, and went back to work. There's a discipline to baking that the rest of life doesn't have. If you measure right and you wait, the dough will rise. People think that's magic. It isn't. It's patience, heat, and time. Santa Fe is a place where the past is close to the skin. You can feel it in the plaza, in the coppery smell after it rains, in the way the light slides over adobe and turns it soft at the edges every evening. I've leaned on that steadiness more times than I can count. That night after closing, I locked up and walked the few blocks home. The sky was wide open and full of stars. My feet knew every crack in the sidewalk, every yard with chili restauras hanging on the porch. I told myself two things as I walked. First, I would not beg for a chair at a table where my name wasn't welcome. Second, I would not let bitterness hollow me out. I've seen what bitterness does. It keeps you stuck replaying the worst part. But here's what else I knew, and I'm telling you this because it matters for everything that follows. In Santa Fe, I am not just a woman who bakes. I am a woman who knows how to keep books clean, how to read contracts, how to hang on to the fine print like a lifeline. When Martin left, I learned the language of survival. Leases, liens, permits, late fees, waivers. People smile at a baker and think she's soft. They don't see the ledger or the spine it takes to hold a life steady when the person who promised to help you carry it puts his share down. So that's who I am. I am the mother who stayed. I am the woman who answered every phone call and kept a photo of Lila in my apron pocket during her first semester away so I could touch it when I missed her. I am the one who will not pretend the invitation didn't cut me open. And I am the one who, when the world tried to cast me out of the room, stepped back long enough to see another doorway. You already know from the way I opened this story that my daughter's beautiful, brag-worthy Santa Fe wedding venue wasn't what she thought it was. We're not at that doorway yet, but we're walking toward it. For now, hold on to this. I was left off the guest list in favor of the father who abandoned us. I stood in my quiet kitchen with the oven ticking and a gold card in my hand, and I decided I would keep my dignity. And when the moment arrived to claim my place, not as a guest but as something else entirely, I would be ready. I sometimes think people imagine Santa Fe as only what the postcards show. Adobe walls glowing gold at sunset, galleries with glass and bronze, tourists wandering the plaza with turquoise around their necks. That's part of it, sure, but there's another Santa Fe, the working Santa Fe. The side that wakes before dawn to make deliveries, that pulls weeds from dry gardens, that ties aprons around tired waists and hopes today's sales cover rent. That's the Santa Fe I know, the one that shaped me and the one I raised my daughter in. My bakery was never fancy, but it was alive. In the mornings, the smell of fresh bread drifted out onto Canyon Road and pulled in artists, teachers, and even city workers from the plaza. The sound of the old oven door creaking became a kind of music I trusted more than any hymn. Lila grew up right there in that rhythm. Her homework spread on the counter while I rolled dough, her little fingers sneaking raisins from the jars when she thought I wasn't looking. She used to say, "Mom, our bakery smells like a hug." I held on to that sentence for years like it was scripture. But life wasn't soft. Martin had walked out when she was still in grade school, leaving nothing but excuses that sounded polished but hollow. He said things like, "I need to find myself, and we'll work something out." What he really meant was, "I'm done here." He drifted into a new life across town, shiny condos, different friends. He popped up on birthdays with gifts that looked good in photos but broke a week later. He became the man who gave her sparkly distractions while I gave her structure, the man she could brag about in front of classmates while I was the one who cleaned up the messes behind the scenes. I swallowed my bitterness and carried on. I took extra shifts. I bartered pies for plumbing repairs. I sold holiday gift baskets when we needed tuition money. I told Lila every chance I got, "You don't need a father who stays gone. You've got me and I'm enough." I thought she believed me. Maybe she did at the time. Then Brandon came into the picture. He was everything Martin liked to pretend he was. Slick, ambitious, dressed in clothes that looked pressed even in desert wind. He had that tone people use when they want you to believe money is never a problem, even when it probably is. He told me once with that easy smile of his, "Nora, you've built something cute here." Cute. He said it while looking around the bakery like it was a dollhouse. He meant no harm maybe, but words land heavier when you've fought for every brick. I noticed how Lila changed after Brandon. She started talking about curating experiences instead of sharing meals. She swapped her simple sandals for heels that clicked too loud on adobe floors. She stopped asking me for advice on recipes and instead showed me photos of plates from high-end restaurants in Santa Fe and Albuquerque, as if my food wasn't good enough anymore. I'd laugh it off, but inside I felt the distance stretching. Still, I told myself it was just the natural way of things. Children growing, parents learning to let go. I tried to be supportive. I went to dinner with them once at a modern bistro where the plates looked like paintings. The menu didn't have a single word I recognized. I remember trying to order something familiar and Brandon chuckled, saying, "You're so traditional, Nora." The word landed like outdated. Lila laughed too, a little too hard, as if she wanted to prove she belonged in his world more than mine. There were other signs. Missed Sunday dinners because they had investor meetings. Forgotten calls on my birthday. Once she slipped and called Brandon's mother Mom in front of me. She laughed it off quickly, but I caught the way her eyes darted, the way shame sat on her cheeks for half a second before she pushed it down. I let it pass. I told myself not to be jealous, not to be small. But jealousy wasn't the right word. It was grief. Grief for the closeness we once had, for the daughter who used to twirl in the bakery kitchen with flour on her face. For the young woman I thought would never let anyone make her feel that her roots were something to be ashamed of. And then came the talk of the wedding. At first it was light-hearted, just mentions of colors, venues, dates. Lila asked me once if I'd ever dreamed of her wedding day. I said yes, of course I had. I dreamed of seeing her in lace, of walking her down a little church aisle, of clapping when she laughed too loud, of being there for her, proud and unshakable. She smiled at me, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Later, I overheard her tell a friend, "It's going to be elegant. No drama. Clean lines." As if I were the drama. As if I were the mess that might stain her perfect day. I didn't want to believe it then, but deep down a part of me already knew what was coming. In Santa Fe, the sunsets paint the sky with colors too wild to describe. They remind you that beauty doesn't need polishing, that sometimes raw edges are what make life worth watching. But Lila had stopped looking at the sunsets. She was too busy looking at what she thought was a brighter horizon, one that didn't have me in the picture. That was life before the betrayal fully unfolded. A mother who sacrificed, a daughter drifting, a father who abandoned but still got invited back. And me, still holding the center quietly without knowing the ground beneath me was about to split. The betrayal itself didn't arrive like thunder. It came quietly, the way desert nights fall in Santa Fe, one shadow at a time, until you look up and realize the sky has turned black without your noticing. I still remember the day the invitation came. Not the first one. I've already told you how I opened that card in my bakery kitchen and saw my husband's name printed in gold while mine was nowhere. That was the first crack. But betrayal rarely stops at one blow. It comes in echoes. About a month later, I decided to do something that mothers do even when they've been wounded. I tried to show up anyway. I told myself maybe there had been a mix-up. Maybe my daughter had been caught between her father and Brandon and was too afraid to speak up. I convinced myself that if I just appeared with kindness, with no accusations, I might still be allowed in her world. So, I put on my best blue dress, the one Lila had once told me made my eyes look like summer skies, and I walked to the bridal boutique on Marcy Street. The air that afternoon was hot and dry, and I remember thinking as I pushed open the door that it smelled of pressed fabric and new promises. The young clerk at the counter gave me a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said softly. "I'm here for my daughter's fitting. Lila Whitaker." I expected her to brighten, maybe to say, "Oh yes, come in, she's just through there." Instead, her eyes flicked down to the appointment list and then back up at me with a hesitation that made my stomach clench. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she whispered, lowering her voice. "Only approved guests are allowed in the suite." Approved guests. I repeated, unsure I'd heard her right. Yes. The bride left specific instructions. She leaned forward, voice even lower. "It says, no mother." Those two words, no mother, burned hotter than any oven I've ever stood beside. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My hands tightened on the strap of my purse until my knuckles whitened. I looked at the clerk, a girl barely older than my daughter had been when she used to sweep flour off my bakery floor, and I saw the pity in her eyes. That pity was worse than anger. It told me this wasn't a mistake. It told me my exclusion was deliberate. I managed to nod, to whisper, "Thank you," though my throat felt thick with dust. I stepped back into the Santa Fe sun, and the heat on my face felt almost cruel. People bustled past me carrying shopping bags and cold drinks, living their ordinary lives, while I stood frozen, realizing my daughter had carved me out of hers. Later that week the wound deepened. A friend from church approached me gently after service asking, "Nora, will you be sitting on the groom's side or the bride's?" She was trying to be polite, to plan her own seating. I forced a smile and said, "Oh, I'm not sure yet," but inside shame boiled. The news had spread. Everyone expected me at that wedding. Everyone but my own child. I confronted Lila that evening over the phone. "Honey," I said carefully, "I went to the boutique today. They told me I wasn't welcome." "Why would you do that?" Her silence stretched so long I thought she might hang up. Then she sighed. "Mom, please don't make this harder. Brandon and I agreed it would be simpler this way." "Simpler?" I asked, my voice shaking. "To erase your mother?" "It's not erasing," she argued. "It's just less complicated. Dad will represent the family. That's what Brandon's parents expect. They don't understand your lifestyle." My lifestyle. That word cut sharper than a knife. She meant my bakery apron, my small home, my plain ways. She meant everything I had sacrificed so she could have a chance at something different. "Lila," I whispered, "I raised you. I gave you everything I had. And you'd rather have the man who walked away stand in my place." Her reply was cold. "It's my wedding, Mom. Please respect that." The call ended. I sat in my kitchen with the phone pressed against my chest, listening to the silence that filled the room after her voice was gone. I realized then that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. My daughter had chosen her absent father and her polished fiancé over the woman who had kept her alive. That was the night I knew I had been betrayed, Not just overlooked, not just forgotten, but deliberately shut out. And that kind of wound doesn't fade quickly. It marks you like the scars the desert wind etches into stone. If you've ever lived in Santa Fe through the heat of July, you'll know how the air itself can feel heavy, pressing down on you until even your bones ache. That's how those weeks after the phone call felt for me, like walking through a desert where the sun never set. The bakery, once my refuge, began to feel like a hollow shell. Customers still came, of course. The gallery workers stopping by for sweet bread, the mothers with children pulling at their skirts. But I couldn't find the rhythm anymore. My hands moved on autopilot, kneading dough, shaping loaves, but my heart wasn't in it. Even the scent of cinnamon, usually so comforting, felt stale. Word of the wedding spread fast in a town like ours. Santa Fe isn't large, and gossip flows faster than the Rio Grande after a storm. People asked me, smiling, "Are you excited for Lila's big day?" Each time I forced my lips into something that looked like a smile and said, "Of course," though inside I felt the truth clawing at me. I wasn't invited. I wasn't wanted. I was invisible in the very story I had helped write. Bills piled up. The landlord raised the rent, citing renovations on the block, though I never saw a lick of work done. Some of the art galleries I supplied started ordering less, saying tourism had dipped. Rumors spread that my bakery might not last the year. Maybe they were just whispers, but when you're already bleeding, even whispers can feel like knives. One night, after closing, I sat alone at the little metal table in the kitchen, surrounded by stacks of unpaid invoices. The oven ticked in the corner, cooling, and the only light came from the old lamp buzzing overhead. I thought about selling the bakery. The very idea made my chest tighten, but reality doesn't care about sentiment. If I lost the shop, I'd lose the only thing I had built that was mine. I went into the back room where I kept boxes of papers. Old deeds, contracts, and notes my mother had left me. She'd been a careful woman, always tucking away documents just in case. At first, I was looking for nothing more than distraction. I thought maybe I'd find an old recipe in her handwriting, something to remind me that not everything had been stripped away. Instead, I found a folder I hadn't noticed in years. Inside was a promissory note, yellowed with time, tied to an old debt. My mother had once lent money to a family friend who owned property downtown near the plaza. Alongside the note was a deed of trust. My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers, the legal language a jumble, but one phrase stood out clear as sunlight: default. The debt had never been repaid. The property, secured by that note, was now tangled up in legal limbo. My heart pounded. I took the papers to the light and scanned them again, my eyes widening as I realized what property it referenced. The Cotton Exchange Hall, a historic adobe building right off East San Francisco Street. A wedding venue. I sat there stunned, the papers spread across the table, the hum of the lamp filling the silence. Could it be? Could I, plain old Nora from Canyon Road, have a claim to the very place my daughter had chosen for her perfect, polished wedding? It felt unreal, like the universe had dropped a key into my lap when I was standing at the very edge of losing everything. My hands shook as I pressed the papers flat. The words on the page seemed to glow. Ownership, transfer, assignable. Words I barely understood, but words that carried weight. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of something I hadn't let myself feel since the betrayal. Possibility. Maybe even hope. The thought formed slowly, then sharpened until it was as clear as the desert night sky. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't erased. Fate had left me a doorway. I whispered into the quiet kitchen, my voice unsteady but firm. Not yet. You won't erase me yet. And that was the night everything began to change. The next morning, I tucked those papers into a manila envelope and carried them to a lawyer's office off Guadalupe Street. I had never been comfortable in law offices. The sharp edges of the furniture, the smell of leather, the rows of books that looked like they weighed more than I did. But I knew enough to know I couldn't unravel this on my own. The lawyer, a woman named Teresa Delgado, adjusted her glasses and read through the documents with the kind of patience only seasoned attorneys seem to have. She looked up at me after a while, eyes sharp. "Mrs. Whittaker, do you realize what you're sitting on here?" "I think so," I said carefully, though my palms were sweating. "This note gives you rights," she explained. "The original debt was never repaid. The trust deed ties directly to the property, the Cotton Exchange Hall. Whoever holds this note can enforce it. That means foreclosure or, in some cases, negotiating for the deed itself." I blinked, the words almost too heavy to take in. "So, I could own it?" "Not tomorrow," she said, "but yes. With the right steps you could. Especially if the current owner is in distress, which—" she tapped the file. "It looks like they are." I left her office with my heart pounding against my ribs. The Cotton Exchange Hall wasn't just any building. It was an adobe landmark. Arched windows, thick walls that kept out the desert heat, chandeliers that had hung for 100 years. It was where the city's wealthiest families held their weddings, where the plaza's gossip was born and spread, where Lila and Brandon had proudly announced they would marry. That afternoon I walked to the hall and stood across the street staring at it. Tourists wandered by, snapping photos of its rustic facade. I imagined Lila's smile when she bragged to friends, "We booked the Cotton Exchange." She thought it was proof she had stepped above her roots. He thought it was a crown. What she didn't know was that crown was already sliding into my hands. Over the next few weeks, Teresa worked with me to purchase the note for pennies on the dollar. The current owners were drowning in debt, desperate to unload. The transfer was quiet, legal, clean. And then, with a few more signatures and a deed in lieu agreement, it was mine. Mine in black ink, filed at the county clerk's office. I didn't tell a soul. Not my neighbors, not the bakery girls who helped me on weekends, not even my sister who called from Albuquerque every Friday. I carried the secret like a stone in my pocket, solid and heavy, reminding me with every step, I wasn't powerless. The first thing I did was meet the staff at the hall. They looked at me with wide eyes when I introduced myself as the new proprietor. "Ms. Whittaker," one of them stammered, "we weren't expecting—" "I know," I said with a smile. "But I'll be staying behind the scenes for now. Keep business as usual." And business as usual meant keeping Lila's wedding on the calendar. I saw it in the booking file, typed neatly, Whittaker Pike wedding, June 14th. The deposit had been paid, but the balance was overdue. The account notes mentioned delays in payment, which meant Brandon's smooth talk wasn't covering all the cracks anymore. I pressed my palm against the ledger and closed my eyes for a moment. The irony was almost too much to bear. My daughter had chosen a venue to symbolize her distance from me, never knowing she had chosen the one place I now controlled completely. At night, lying in bed, I thought about how to use this. Should I confront her outright? Should I cancel her booking, force her to face me? The idea was tempting, but I wanted more than revenge. I wanted her to see the truth, that you cannot erase someone who has built the very ground you walk on. So I decided to wait. To let her wedding march forward, each step bringing her closer to the moment when she would realize the person she had dismissed was not only present but essential. In the meantime, I poured myself into the hall. I had the wood floors polished until they gleamed, the adobe walls touched up, the courtyard lanterns replaced. I even planted desert sage near the entryway, its silver leaves catching the evening light. Every improvement I made wasn't just for the building. It was for me. It was proof that I could take something broken and make it strong again. The bakery still limped along, but each day at the hall filled me with a sense of purpose. My mother's careful saving, her foresight in keeping that note, had given me a gift I hadn't expected. And so I waited. Quiet, steady, patient. I let Lila believe the world was hers, while knowing the truth sat quietly in my hands. Weddings have a way of revealing the cracks people try so hard to cover. And with Lila and Brandon, those cracks began to show long before the vows. From my quiet vantage point as the new owner of the Cotton Exchange Hall, I watched the pressure build like a summer storm over the desert. At first it was little things. A caterer calling the office to ask when the final balance would be paid. A florist grumbling that the check had bounced. The staff whispering about emails from Brandon full of excuses. Funds are tied up. Investors are slow. It's only a matter of days. I saw the notes in the booking ledger. Payment overdue. Vendor unsettled. The kinds of phrases that make event planners lose sleep. But I said nothing. I let the storm gather. One afternoon I stopped by the hall while the staff was meeting with Brandon and Lila. I stayed out of sight, listening from the corridor where the adobe walls carried every word like echoes. Brandon, we can't confirm the lighting rig until you settle last month's invoice, the coordinator said gently. Brandon's voice tightened. Do you people not understand? I'm building a tech company. Money flows differently for people like me. You'll be paid. And then I heard Lila's voice, sharper than I expected. Brandon, just pay them. This is my wedding, not a business transaction. There was a pause, then his slick tone returned. Relax, babe. You worry too much. I pressed my hand to the wall and closed my eyes. My daughter's laugh used to sound like bells when she was a child. Now even when she laughed, I heard the strain underneath. Meanwhile, Santa Fe itself seemed to be reminding me that no one could polish away reality forever. The summer winds picked up, carrying dust through the plaza. The heat pressed down on everyone, relentless. And in the bakery, I overheard customers whisper about Brandon's company losing investors, about promises not kept. Santa Fe is small. Word spreads fast. Through it all, I kept my secret. I kept paying the bills on the hall, making sure the door stayed open, making sure vendors knew someone responsible stood behind the building. But I didn't sign my name on any of the outward papers. Not yet. Instead, I poured my energy into quiet improvements. The chandeliers were cleaned until they sparkled. The courtyard fountain was repaired, its water trickling steady again. I ordered new linens, soft ivory ones that felt smooth under the hand. Every change made the hall shine brighter, preparing it for the moment when the truth would no longer be hidden. And the pressure kept mounting. Brandon's parents, old money folks from out east, began making their own demands. We expect the guest list to be handled properly, I overheard one of them say to the coordinator. No surprises. They spoke with that clipped tone people use when they're really saying, keep her mother out. Each word only hardened my resolve. They thought I was powerless, invisible, erased. But the very walls they were decorating belonged to me. By the time the rehearsal week arrived, the tension was thick enough to taste in the air. Vendors were restless. Brandon was snapping at everyone. Lila looked pale, her shoulders stiff beneath her bridal fittings. And through it all I remained calm, waiting. I knew storms like this only end in two ways. Destruction or revelation. And I had already chosen which it would be. The day of the rehearsal dawned hot, the kind of Santa Fe day where the sun bakes the adobe walls until they radiate heat long into the evening. I woke early, even before the bakery ovens would normally hum, and sat at my kitchen table staring at the manila folder that held the deed, the corporate filings, and every paper that spelled out the truth. My hands brushed over the edges of the documents. They felt heavier than paper should, as if carrying all the weight of the years I had struggled, sacrificed, and been cast aside. That afternoon I walked into the Cotton Exchange Hall not as a baker, not as an abandoned wife, not even as a mother left off the guest list. I walked in as the owner. The hall buzzed with activity. Staff hurried to adjust table settings, florists carried in buckets of desert roses, and Brandon's sharp voice cut through the air as he barked instructions. Lila stood near the front, her dress a simple rehearsal gown, her face pale under the weight of her own nerves. I caught sight of Martin too, my estranged husband, smiling like he belonged, like he hadn't left me to stitch our lives back together alone. The sight of him sitting comfortably among the guests twisted something in my chest, but I steadied myself. All right, let's keep this on schedule, Brandon snapped at the coordinator. His tone carried the arrogance of a man who thought the whole world bent to his timing. That was when my manager, a soft-spoken young woman named Camila, cleared her throat. She glanced toward me, her eyes steady, and announced to the room, "Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed, allow me to introduce Miss Eleanor Whitaker, proprietor of the Cotton Exchange Hall." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Lila turned first, her mouth parting in disbelief. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Brandon's face darkened. "This is inappropriate. She doesn't belong here." I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the polished wooden floor, the sound echoing through the hall like punctuation. Calmly, I placed the manila folder on the nearest table and opened it, spreading the documents out for all to see. The deed, the transfer, the filings. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "I belong here more than anyone. This hall is mine." Gasps rippled through the room. Guests whispered. A few even leaned forward to read the papers, their eyes widening as they saw the signatures and stamps. Brandon sneered, his voice rising. "This is absurd. Some kind of trick." I looked him straight in the eye. "No trick. Every vendor contract, every guest list, every detail flows through me. I've kept this place afloat while you dragged your feet on payments. Without me, this wedding would have collapsed weeks ago." Lila's face flushed crimson. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. "Because," I said softly, "you didn't want me in your wedding. I respected your choice. But fate put this hall in my hands, and I will not hide from the truth." Brandon's parents exchanged frantic glances. Martin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his false confidence cracking. And around us, the wedding party murmured, some with sympathy, some with shock, but none able to deny what lay in black and white on the table. I straightened my shoulders. "You tried to erase me, but here I stand. Not as a guest, but as the owner of the very place you thought would keep me out." For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet trickle of the courtyard fountain outside. Then, like thunder after lightning, the reality set in. The balance of power had shifted, and every eye in the room knew it. If the reveal had dropped silence over the rehearsal, the aftermath was the storm that followed. The quiet murmur of the fountain outside was quickly drowned by a wave of voices. Some shocked, some angry, some pitying. Brandon's mother was the first to break. She marched toward her son, her pearl necklace catching the light as her face pinched tight with fury. "You told us everything was settled," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You told us the payments were complete." Brandon raised his hands like a man caught in a spotlight. "It's fine, Mother. It's under control. He pointed at me, his finger shaking. "She's lying or she's exaggerating." I tapped the folder still lying open on the table. "Every invoice I covered is in here. Paid in full with my signature. Not yours. Not Brandon's. I made sure the florist, the caterer, and the lighting team weren't left scrambling because of promises you didn't keep." The room grew restless. A bridesmaid leaned toward another and whispered loudly enough for all to hear, "She saved the wedding." Lila's cheeks burned red. She turned on me, her voice shaking between anger and humiliation. "Why would you do this, Mom? Why would you go behind my back?" I met her eyes, steady and calm. "I didn't go behind your back. You shut the door. I just walked through another entrance." Her lips trembled. For a moment I saw my little girl in her face, the one who used to twirl around the bakery kitchen. But then the shadow of Brandon's influence settled back in, and she clenched her fists. "You wanted to ruin this day. You wanted to embarrass me." I shook my head slowly. "No, Lila. I wanted to make sure you had a day that didn't collapse under lies and unpaid bills. You may hate me for being here, but without me, you'd have no wedding at all." Martin finally stood, clearing his throat. He tried to put on that old charming voice I used to fall for, the one he used when making excuses for missed bills or broken promises. Now, he said, "let's not make this into more than it is. Nora always did have a flair for drama." The words made me laugh, but not with humor. "Drama," I repeated. Drama is walking away from your family and showing back up years later like nothing happened. Drama is watching your daughter erase her mother and clapping from the sidelines. What I've done here isn't drama, Martin, it's dignity. The whispers turned into a buzz. Brandon's father pulled him aside, speaking in sharp tones that carried even across the room. You've humiliated us. If this is how you handle business, I shudder to think how you handle investments. For the first time I saw Brandon's mask slip. His jaw tightened, his face pale. He was losing control and he knew it. The rehearsal ended not with laughter or cheer, but with guests scattering, murmuring, casting sidelong glances at the bride and groom. The hall, once a symbol of their perfect day, had turned into a stage where the truth played out under glaring lights. When the crowd thinned, Lila stood before me, eyes shining with unshed tears. You've taken everything from me, she whispered. I reached for her hand, but she pulled back. My voice softened. No, sweetheart. I've only taken back what was mine. What you tried to give to everyone but me. She turned away, shoulders stiff, and walked out into the desert twilight with Brandon trailing behind, his voice low and sharp as he hissed in her ear. I stood alone in the hall, the lanterns casting long shadows across the polished floor. For the first time since the invitation had arrived, I didn't feel erased. I felt present, unshakable, and undeniable. The morning after the rehearsal, the desert sky over Santa Fe was painted in streaks of coral and gold, but in my chest, there was no sunrise, only a dull heaviness. I baked as I always did, hands moving through the rhythm of flour and water, though my thoughts were still tangled in the words Lila had thrown at me. You've taken everything from me. I knew they weren't her truest words, only the voice of a young woman caught between appearances and truth. But they cut all the same. That evening I returned to the hall quietly. The vendors were cleaning up from a walk-through, folding linens and stacking chairs. I noticed Brandon pacing in the courtyard, phone pressed hard to his ear, his voice low but sharp. I stayed in the shadows, unseen, letting his words wash over me. Listen, I told you the deal is stalled, he snapped. I just need another 60 days. No, I can't wire anything now. Don't threaten me, I'll handle it. He ended the call and swore under his breath, the polished mask slipping completely. A few minutes later, Lila came out, clutching her planner. She looked tired, her eyes hollowed out. Brandon, she said softly, the caterer just told me we're still behind. Is it true? Did you pay them? Brandon turned, plastering on that too bright smile he used with investors. Babe, don't stress. These people exaggerate. I've got it under control. But Lila wasn't smiling. Her shoulders sagged, her voice small. Why didn't you tell me Mom paid the florist and the lighting team? She showed me receipts. For the first time, Brandon didn't have an answer ready. His mouth opened, then closed. Finally, he scoffed. She's just trying to make me look bad. You know how she is. And then came the blow that broke the mask wide open. Lila held up her phone. Is this how she is? She scrolled and read aloud from the screen, her voice shaking. Your mom is nothing but a grease-stained baker. I'm not letting her embarrass us in front of my family. The silence that followed was thicker than adobe walls. Brandon lunged forward. Where did you get that? It was forwarded from one of the planners, she whispered. You think people don't talk? You humiliated her, Brandon. You humiliated me. He tried to recover, smoothing his tone. Don't be naive. She doesn't belong in our world. Neither do you unless you stand with me. That was the moment something shifted in my daughter's eyes. I saw the recognition hit her like a desert windstorm. Sudden, sharp, undeniable. She looked at him not with adoration but with clarity, as though the scales had finally fallen away. I don't want your world, she said quietly. Not if it means tearing down the only person who's ever stood by me. Brandon reached for her arm, but she pulled away. Her gaze darted toward me in the shadows, and for the first time in months, her voice cracked open. Mom. I stepped forward, no longer hiding. I'm here. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what to do. I took her hands, warm and trembling, in mine. You do, I said softly. You've always known. You just have to choose yourself this time. Not Brandon, not appearances, not even me. Just you. She looked down, her tears dripping onto the flagstone courtyard. Then, with a deep breath, she lifted her chin and whispered the words I'd prayed to hear. I can't marry him. Brandon exploded. Are you insane? Do you know what this looks like? Do you know what people will say? Lila turned to him, her voice steadier now. Let them say what they want. I'd rather walk away alone than stand at the altar beside a liar. His face twisted with fury, but she didn't flinch. She slipped her arm through mine and together, we walked back into the hall, leaving him standing in the courtyard, his voice chasing us but carrying no power anymore. For the first time since that gold envelope arrived in my mailbox, I felt something other than humiliation. I felt the beginning of healing. Not perfect, not complete, but a fragile thread stretched between mother and daughter. Santa Fe has a way of holding on to stories. They don't just fade into the desert wind. They linger in the adobe walls, in the whispers of the plaza, in the way the evening light bends across the Sangre de Cristo mountains. Lila's wedding that wasn't became one of those stories. People still talk about it, though they lower their voices when I walk into a room. But I don't carry shame anymore. I carry peace. In the weeks that followed, the hall remained mine, not as a secret but as a fact. I opened its doors not just for high society weddings but for community gatherings, quinceañeras, veterans banquets, even art shows for the students at the college. I made it a place that welcomed people like me, working hands, humble hearts, anyone who had been told they weren't enough. Every time I unlocked those doors, I felt a quiet strength settle into me, the kind of strength that doesn't boast but simply exists, undeniable. The bakery still stands on Canyon Road. The ovens tick the same way, the smell of cinnamon still drifts into the morning air. Only now, when I knead the dough, I don't feel the weight of being erased. I feel the pride of someone who has survived, who has claimed her place in the story. As for Lila, our path is slow, fragile, but it is real. She moved into a small adobe casita on the edge of town, away from Brandon, away from the shadow of his empty promises. On Sundays she comes by the bakery. Sometimes she helps me braid challah, her fingers clumsy at first, then steady as the rhythm returns. We don't talk much about the wedding anymore. Instead, we talk about ordinary things. Recipes, the weather, memories of her childhood. Healing, I've learned, isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up week after week with patience. Martin? He drifted back into his silence after the rehearsal. He doesn't call. He doesn't write. Maybe he thought the role of father of the bride would polish his image, and when that disappeared, so did he. But I don't waste time mourning a man who made his choices long ago. My peace isn't tied to him. It never was. I've come to see that justice doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes justice looks like a woman standing in the very hall she wasn't welcome in, holding the keys, deciding who comes and who goes. Sometimes it looks like a daughter realizing too late who her true anchor has always been, and beginning little by little to hold on again. So, when I close my eyes at night and the desert air drifts through my window, I don't replay the pain of being left off that invitation. I replay the moment I stood in front of a room full of doubters and laid down the truth. I replay the sound of my daughter's voice breaking free from Brandon's lies. And I let those memories settle like the stars over Santa Fe, steady, enduring, unshakable. Because here's the truth I want you to hear. They tried to erase me. They tried to cast me out of the very story I had written with my own hands. But in the end, I didn't just find my place, I claimed it. And that, my friend, is what dignity looks like. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.